You're watching Channel 23, and we are watching you watch. This is the United States of America. In World War II, America was a leader in the fight against fascism. 80 years later, the fascists are back, right here in our streets, shielded by the very government that once brought them low. What will you do to defeat them?
What is this?
Some people fight fascism through direct action, such as protests, calling or writing to their government representatives, donating to political causes, joining political parties, even putting themselves on the front line by running for office.
Is this a campaign ad?
But, just as in World War II, not everyone can be in the army. If for any reason you cannot get involved in the political process that keeps our democracy healthy, you still have your vote. Put it to good use. Don't let your vote be lost to the scourge of wank voting. What is wank voting? It is a refusal to participate in political coalition building, usually motivated by a desire for personal ideological purity. This manifests most often as a loud proclamation of intent to vote third party, or not to vote at all, and an encouragement for others to do the same.
I voted third party once.
To understand wank voting better, we shall have to consider its past effects, its consequences, and what we can do in the present. In the vast majority of elections in the United States, the candidate who gets the most votes wins the election. For the office of president, however, the winner is the individual with a majority of electoral votes, which are won on a state-by-state basis. If no candidate has a majority, the president is elected by the House of Representatives.
Which happened twice before the Civil War.
In the years following World War II, the prospect of throwing an election into the House of Representatives was used by Southern conservatives in the Democratic Party to forestall the National Party's efforts to expand and defend the civil rights of millions of Americans.
Black Americans.
In 1948, Democratic President Harry Truman's civil rights initiatives so infuriated Southern conservatives that they ran a different Democrat against him. These Dixiecrats hoped to split the Democratic Party so that the election had to be decided in the House, with Dixiecrat states supporting whichever candidate would pledge to preserve their oppressive racial laws.
This can't be a campaign.
This effort did not succeed, nor did repeat efforts in the 1960s. After 20 years, Southern conservatives realized that the only way to effect the change they wanted, in this case the preservation of a racially segregated America, was working within an existing political party.
Or they could learn to live with black people.
The presence of a large conservative bloc within the Democratic Party was a historical accident. It had been Republicans who had brought about the defeat of the Confederacy. When terrorism led to the return of the South's social order, with the black population disenfranchised and oppressed, Southern conservatives joined the Democratic Party. Former Confederate states became single-party fiefdoms in which uncompetitive elections masked authoritarian governments.
One-party states.
During and after the Great Depression, as the Democratic Party became more liberal, conservative Democrats worked with Republicans to block liberal priorities such as expanding workers' rights, reining in big business, and funding urban social programs. Southern conservatives found their interests better represented by the Republican Party than by the Democratic Party. In 1964, conservative Republicans secured the nomination of Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater for president. Goldwater's opposition to federal civil rights protections won him the electoral votes of 5 southern states, 4 of which had not voted Republican since 1876. This began a migration of Southern conservatives from the Democratic to the Republican Party. By 1980, GOP moderates were in retreat. That year, liberal Republican John Anderson ran an independent campaign for president against Democratic incumbent Jimmy Carter and the Republican challenger, conservative champion Ronald Reagan. Reagan defeated both his opponents, delivering the White House to conservatives for the first time in half a century. It's useful to examine the two approaches taken by Southern conservatives. For the first 20 years, they refused to work with their old rivals, the Republican Party, despite having much in common with the conservative wing of the party. In other words, they engaged in wank voting.
You're really calling
Once
it
they
wank
began
voting?
acting within the Republican Party, Republican leadership courted them. When they began challenging moderate incumbents in primaries, they began winning. After only 12 years, Southern conservatives helped put Ronald Reagan, an opponent of federal civil rights protections, in the White House. Within the Republican Party, Southern conservatives have enjoyed greater and greater success. 15 years after Reagan's victory, a conservative Republican Party won control of Congress. However, it was Southern-style conservatism that had taken over, a style of conservatism that had grown and flourished in an authoritarian single-party environment, a style of conservatism that regarded opposition as illegitimate. a style of conservatism that looked on political and social minorities as threats to be suppressed. So far, we've only seen examples from the right side of the political spectrum. Are there examples of wank voting on the political left?
No?
Yes.
Oh.
The scourge of wank voting can strike anywhere on the political spectrum. Let's look at recent examples of wank voting on the left. In the 2000 presidential election, consumer activist Ralph Nader was the nominee of the left-wing Green Party.
I remember that.
Nader attracted left-wing voters who were disappointed by a perceived rightward shift in the Democratic Party. Nader claimed that there was no meaningful difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. He recognized he had no realistic chance of victory, but stated that he wanted to help the Green Party get enough votes to qualify for federal matching funds in the future. However, in the month before the election, he campaigned in a half-dozen swing states, most of which were not likely to give him many votes, and any one of which could decide the election between Republican George W. Bush and Democrat Al Gore. His choice of states increased the risk that Bush would win, which would be a setback for environmental protection and civil rights, both Green Party priorities. 1 week before the election, Nader hinted that he would welcome a Bush victory, since it would galvanize the environmental community as never before. In a 2004 article, sociologist Harry Levine of Queens College stated that Tarek Milliran, Ralph Nader's nephew and advisor, told him the month before the election, "We want to punish the Democrats. We want to hurt them." On election day, exit polls indicated that if Nader had not been on the ballot, 3/8 of his voters would not have voted. 2/8 would have voted for Bush, and the remaining 3/8 would have voted for Gore. In the end, Republican voter suppression and poor ballot design made it possible for Nader's campaign to make a difference and swing the election to Bush. The following 8 years of the Bush administration brought huge setbacks for the left. Environmental and civil rights protections, as well as regulations restricting corporate rapacity, were all eroded by legislative action or through court decisions issued by Bush-appointed federal judges. Bush appointed 2 Supreme Court justices, John Roberts and Sam Alito, both of whom have proven hostile to voting rights. Their appointment made it easier for Republicans to hold on to power, and harder for liberals and the left to make gains. Though by no means the sole cause of this setback for the left, Nader's campaign against Gore in Florida and other swing states was the proximate cause of Gore's defeat.
Not sure I agree
The
with that.
desire by Nader and his voters to punish Democrats for being insufficiently left-wing crippled left-wing causes such as social justice, environmental protection, and restriction of corporate power. The same dynamic played out in the 2016 contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That year, the Democrats were led by the first woman to be a major party's presidential nominee, and ran on their strongest civil rights platform ever. Clinton had spent 20 years accumulating the skills and building the relationships she would need to be an effective
That
president.
feels like 40 years
Republicans
ago.
had nominated another old white plutocrat, but one with no experience at all in government. Trump was a reality TV star with a string of failed and fraudulent businesses behind him, running on a platform of authoritarian ethno-nationalism that was hostile to non-whites, non-Christians, and the LGBT community.
Oh, don't we know it?
Even more clearly than in the 2000 election, the future of the Supreme Court, and consequently the fates of millions of Americans, hung in the balance. However, a substantial number of liberal and left-wing commentators urged people to vote third party or abstain.
I read articles like
Many of
that.
these were so-called Bernie bros. Bernie because they supported Clinton's competitor in the Democratic primary, independent Senator Bernie Sanders, and bros because Sanders' supporters were more likely to be male, more likely to be white, and somewhat younger than Clinton's supporters.
I voted for him too.
For this branch of the left, Clinton's ability to knit together a winning coalition of Democratic Party factions, one that included moderate and centrist voters and donors, was a liability rather than an asset.
Appealing
She
to a
was
lot of people is
suspect
bad?
because her coalition
Isn't that how you
wasn't
win
pure
elections?
enough. In the end, though she got the most votes, Clinton lost the election. Unlike the 2000 election, however, third-party voting by the left was not the proximate cause of her defeat. The Bernie bros were not to blame. But it was a contributing factor, and the motivation was the same as in 2000, to punish the Democrats for their lack of ideological purity. Too many people decided that casting a protest vote for a third-party candidate mattered more than protecting the millions of Americans threatened by a Republican victory. To this day, Sanders supporters are often unfairly blamed for Clinton's defeat, but the bitterness is understandable.
Hi.
Hi.
You busy?
Just watching TV and having dinner?
How'd you eat with your mask on?
Well, something strange came on and I forgot all about it. Well, come in. What's wrong? There is something wrong. What's bothering you?
Okay. I had a bad dream. It was 2021, and Trump was still president. He had fixed the election or canceled it or something, and now he was locking people up.
Why don't you do what you usually do, raid the liquor cabinet and go back to bed?
Well, I did. And you're out of mead, sherry, port, and beer.
Of course. But what's different this time? You don't usually come to me when you can't sleep.
Well, this was a political nightmare, and you know things about stuff.
What?
Come on, you're the Oracle of Solace. Give me some solace here. You're smart. Tell me Trump can't cancel the election.
I don't think I'm that smart, but I do read a lot. And from what I've read, Trump can't cancel or even delay the election without the cooperation of Congress or the states.
What's to stop him?
First, elections are run by the states, not the federal government. Second, the Constitution sets the date on which his term ends. If there are no elections, he still stops being president on January 20th.
What if Trump declares a national emergency? Could he stay on as acting president during an emergency?
That's where there might be trouble. Presidential emergency powers aren't well defined. They've never been used to cancel an election before. In 1864, there was a civil war, and Lincoln thought he might not be reelected, but the election went through anyway. But even if Trump issues such an order, he's going to need people willing to carry it out.
Well, there are plenty of bootlickers and brown-nosers willing to obey him.
But state governments control elections. They don't have to obey him. The states that hold elections on November 3rd get to appoint electors, and whoever gets a majority of the appointed electors' votes on December 14th will become president-elect. If Democratic states defy him and only Democratic states vote, then Biden becomes president.
What about what happened in Washington and Portland? Could he use the secret police to stop elections?
If everyone in the military and everyone in the National Guard and everyone in law enforcement were absolutely loyal to him, it still wouldn't be enough. The country is too big and there are too many people.
Are you sure he can't stop the election?
This is life, nothing is sure.
That doesn't make me feel better. You're not the Oracle of Solace, you're the Oracle of Dumbass.
If you want to worry about whether the elections can be cancelled, you'll think up a scenario in which it can happen. I can't give you solace if you don't want it.
Okay.
It's much more likely that Republicans will attempt to prevent you from voting at all. They're betting that you will be too afraid of the pandemic to vote in person, and they're sabotaging the post office to interfere with voting by mail. You have to be ready to do whatever it takes to vote.
I'm not sure I can be that enthusiastic about Biden. He wasn't my first choice.
Tell me about it. I voted for Bernie. But Biden's the one Democrats, particularly black Democrats, picked. For all his flaws, Biden's the one who put together a winning coalition. Bernie didn't do as well against Biden as he did against Clinton.
Why?
Someone smarter than me will have to answer that. To me, it looks like Bernie bet all his chips on younger voters who, unfortunately, are not reliable voters. There were fewer under 30 voters this year than in 2016. Also, he didn't join the Democratic Party after his 2016 run, probably to protect his brand as an independent. And he never made the alliances with Democratic voters and leaders that he needed.
I like that he's independent.
Independent doesn't mean you can't court potential allies. In the Senate, Bernie caucuses with the Democrats because he fits in very well with the liberal wing of the party. But his campaign seemed much more interested in getting the endorsement of a right-wing podcaster than in getting the endorsement of major Democratic leaders.
Maybe he wanted to show he could attract voters from outside the party if he won the nomination.
Courting people who never vote Democratic is not the way to win the Democratic nomination. In some ways, Bernie didn't behave like he wanted to win.
Then why was he in the race? Come on, Miss Smarty Pants. Why was he running if he didn't want to win?
This might sound stupid to you.
Well?
Aren't you going to say something like, "You always sound stupid to me"?
No.
Why not?
Because you don't always sound stupid to me.
Ah.
Only sometimes.
Thank you.
You were saying?
Oh yes. I don't think Bernie wants to be the head of the Democratic Party. I think he wants to be its heart.
What's that mean?
Sanders supporters like his idealism. I like how he criticizes the system. He's a loner, Dottie. A rebel.
My name's not Dottie.
But we can't pretend the system doesn't exist. The hard work of politics, the daily labor of it, involves getting people with different priorities, most of whom are invested in the system, to support your priorities. Bernie knows this. It's why, in the general election, he's supporting Biden, and why he supported Clinton 4 years ago.
But if everyone works within the system never changes.
That's why we need idealistic outsiders. Biden is the walking embodiment of an establishment Democratic politician, but he's always known where the center of the party is. In 1996, like most Democrats, he opposed marriage equality. But by 2012, the party had shifted, and Biden was persuaded by that shift to support marriage equality. He even pushed Obama into announcing his support.
Was Biden persuaded, or was he just being opportunistic?
Does it matter?
Of course it matters. Maybe he's just trying to get our votes.
In a democracy, that's what politicians do.
I'm saying I don't know how sincere he is.
Suppose I were opposed to marriage equality.
You'd be a bigot and I'd hate you.
But suppose you changed my mind.
Yeah, then we'd be okay.
I'd be a better person in your eyes?
Duh.
Politicians can become better people too. It's something we should reward rather than punish.
I don't trust him.
Good. Politicians are slippery customers. You always have to keep the pressure on. Even if Bernie were elected president, I'm sure there would still be many policies about which I would complain.
I don't like how he is with women.
He's been improving on that, too. He grew up in a world where we weren't allowed personal space. But the wealthiest and most powerful cohort of women, white women, had a chance to take a stand in 2016. 53% of us voted against the woman and for the guy who bragged about sexual assault.
Oh, don't remind me.
And Biden's handsiness comes from a very physical personal politics. Watch him in crowds. He shakes hands, squeezes shoulders, makes eye contact close and personal.
What crowds? There's a pandemic now.
Well, in the before time he did. He genuinely likes to connect with people. There are a lot of stories about his empathic interactions with ordinary people. If we get nothing else out of his election, we'll at least have a person in the White House who likes other people.
I guess that's something.
And think about returning to competent government. You came to me with a nightmare of 2021. Let me offer you an alternative future. President Biden rarely tweets. People find they can go days without thinking of politics. Qualified nominees are in place throughout the administration. They demonstrate leadership in dealing with the pandemic and always appear in public with masks. With federal support, medical supply chains are finally operational.
While Republicans scream about socialism.
No doubt. And picture this. Nobody is interfering with investigations into Trump, his family, and his business. And whistleblowers are coming out of the woodwork with stories of Trump-era corruption.
I think I just had a little orgasm.
President Biden pays attention to his daily briefings and makes policy proposals based on expert advice. He nominates judges who will protect rather than threaten reproductive rights, labor rights, LGBT rights. We have a national reconstruction plan drafted in part by Bernie and AOC, and though the left doesn't win every fight, we keep up the pressure. Our allies around the world breathe a sigh of relief, and slowly, America's reputation begins to recover.
What the hell are you watching?
I'm honestly not sure. At first I thought it was a campaign ad, then I thought it was a documentary, but it's too strange to be either.
A person's vote is in danger of being lost to wank voting
Wank
when the
voting?
ideas behind wank voting
Yes,
are
watch.
encountered unchallenged. The enticement to wank voting often begins with the innocent assertion that the United States needs a third national party. This may or may not be true. There are other democratic nations with 3 or more major parties. But it has been over 100 years since there was a sustained effort to build a third party that could compete on a national level.
Which party was that?
In the absence
The
of a
Socialist
competitive
Party.
third party,
Really?
the choice for president is between 2 individuals. You may hear this argument.
There's no difference between the 2 parties. They're equally bad.
This claim is patently false. It is true that in the 20th century, the 2 parties had considerable ideological overlap. In the 21st, there is only one party that consistently opposes civil rights, public education and health programs, and environmental protection. There is only one party that works to increase corporate power, suppress voting rights, and entrench racial and religious privilege. the Republicans.
Yes, the Republicans are indeed
For
assholes.
voters on the left, Democratic policies are better than Republican policies on many issues and worse on none. As we have seen from historical examples, if you are on the side that engages in the most wank voting, it will be harder for your side to achieve its goals. Even if this fact is recognized, a left-leaning voter can still be tempted into wank voting by another argument.
The sooner things get worse, the sooner the people will tear down the system and build a better one.
Heightening the contradiction.
This argument ignores the terrible human cost of making things worse. Elections are a matter of life and death for individuals in vulnerable communities because they will bear the brunt of any unjust outcomes of the victor's policies. Many of them will perish before or during the widespread sustained deprivation necessary to bring about a revolutionary mood. A third temptation threatening your vote is an appeal to ideological purity. Have you heard this before?
Voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. You don't want to vote for evil, do you?
This is the siren song of wank voting. You don't have to do the hard work of politics. You just show up at the ballot box every 4 years and you can spend the intervening time congratulating yourself on the purity of your politics while you wait for someone to cater to your desires.
Wow.
Do not be tempted. Demonstrations of ideological purity will not do anything for LGBT rights. Declaring yourself too good for the Democratic Party does nothing to reduce economic inequality. Waiting for the perfect bespoke politician who inspires you will not lead to effective police reform. These things only delay or set back the priorities of the left. Lesser evil is false framing. When you vote, you are voting for the best opportunity to apply future pressure. Politicians are not elected to make you feel special. You are not supporting a savior who will rescue you. You are selecting an employee who will listen to you.
Some of these bitches need to be
Major
fired.
reforms are always the result of best opportunity voting, creating coalitions, and building on minor reforms. American voters are wary of sweeping changes. Successful gradual reforms build public confidence that bigger reforms can work. Promising sweeping reform and then failing to deliver only increases public cynicism.
They're telling me to lower my
Liberals and the left will
expectations.
achieve more
They're
of
telling
their
you not
goals
to
by
promise
working
too
within
much.
the
It scares
Democratic
people.
Party. Quitting the party because you have been unable to persuade its voters to support your position does not make you a hero. Political movements only win when they persist, and even centrists can be persuaded to support progressive policies. Recently, in New York State, conservative Democrats caucused with the Republicans to block liberal legislation. Liberal activists at first supported third-party candidates. Splitting the left helped bolster the conservative faction's numbers. But when the left worked within the Democratic Party, they defeated the conservatives, passing progressive legislation which the governor, a centrist, signed into law. Similarly, the governor of Virginia, a moderate Democrat, signed into law LGBT protections, marijuana legalization, and an expansion of early voting. This was made possible not because the left refused to vote for Democrats, but because they helped elect a Democratic legislature in November 2019. A political party is more than a single person. When you vote for president, you're not only voting for a person, but for everyone that person will appoint. Some of these appointments will have lasting impacts on the ability of the left to affect change.
Like judges.
Many of you are disappointed that your preferred candidate won't be on the ballot. Replacing one old white man with another doesn't look like an opportunity for change. But to get the change you want, you need allies who are capable of changing their minds. Trump is not. Ask yourself this: is your politics inspired by a desire to improve people's lives, or by your disdain for other people's politics? If you want to improve people's lives, then you have to use elections to consolidate your side's gains and prepare for future battles, not to demonstrate your purity. Protest votes will accomplish nothing. You will still need to participate in demonstrations no matter who wins. If you care enough about voting to cast a ballot, then you can vote for Biden and protest his worst policies afterward. Protests do not belong in the ballot box. They belong in our streets, in our state houses, and on our screens. It may be true that America needs a third party that competes at the national level. Such a party will take years of work to build, and will first have to gain the confidence of voters by showing how it governs at the local and state level. Wank voters may claim that they are in fact attempting to build a third national party. To be blunt, this is not the time. If Trump is not defeated in 2020, there may never again be any competitive elections. Republicans acquitted an obviously corrupt president who is attempting to fix the elections. From this, it appears Republicans believe they can put an end to fair elections.
I still have my battle axe.
Donald Trump must lose decisively. The only candidate who can defeat him is Joe Biden. Remaining neutral on the question of moderate liberalism versus authoritarian ethno-nationalism betrays an indifference to Trump's victims that make a mockery of any claims to moral purity. You are an American, and as such are an inheritor of ideals which America itself has found hard to live up to. Under the Trump regime, the United States of America is no longer united, is not a federation of sovereign states, and is not governed by ideals which are recognizably American. You are an American, and as such it is your fate never to be satisfied with your government, and your duty to seek its improvement. You do not get to protest at the ballot box, then stay home for 4 years and complain about how things never get any better. You are an American, and as such you have an obligation to your fellow Americans to do the best you can for yourself and for them. If disappointment with a single year's elections leads you to surrender the electoral battlefield to fascists, then you are never going to fight for your principles in the first place. If Southern conservatives can mobilize to take over the Republican Party in order to preserve white supremacy, the left can mobilize to take over the Democratic Party in order to promote justice. If you want a better America, you have to be a better American. Don't be a wanker.
What the hell was that?
I have no idea, but it makes me want to vote.
It made it seem immoral not to vote for Biden.
That wasn't my impression. What I got is that politics should be treated more like sports ball. Don't throw in the towel just because your favorite hitter doesn't score a touchdown. Keep sweeping the puck down the field one play at a time until it goes in the basket.
You don't know anything about sports, do you?
If you want change, you have to change the minds of people who win elections. You want people in office who can be pressured to adopt your priorities. Don't walk away from potential allies just because they don't already agree with you.
Yeah, they left out something. I hear people complain that voting never changes anything, so why bother?
If voting never changed anything, why are Republicans working so hard to make it hard to vote? They don't want people voting because they know it changes things.
Oh yeah. That was strange.
Yeah.
Who would even produce something like that?
Some well-intentioned weirdo with too much time on their hands.
Well, I better brush my teeth and get back to bed.
Good night. Sleep well. No more Trump nightmares.